Now when the women went to the tomb near sunrise on Sunday, they had observed that Christ was resurrected sometime earlier. If you remember in John 20th chapter 17th verse, he specifically told Mary Magdalene not to touch him, and this had very prophetic significance, as it was not yet 9 o'clock in the morning, and that was the time he would be offered up to the Father in heaven and accepted. Until that point, he could not be defiled by human touch. Later on, however, when he was seen in other occurrences after he had been accepted by the Father, it was okay to touch him. He actually encouraged Thomas to touch his marks on his hands and know that he is the risen Lord. Many Christians are misled today in reading Matthew's account of the resurrection, supposing the event to occurred simultaneously with the earthquake and the visitation by the angel who told the women not to be afraid. But the reality is the resurrection had occurred before the stone rolled away the night before. Now, there's further confusion in Mark's account in that later church manuscripts added the last 9 to 20th verses of chapter 16, which starts out by saying that Jesus rose early on the first day of the week. I can see why the disciples were misled into thinking that Jesus resurrected on Sunday instead of Saturday, because Sunday was the first evidence they had the fact that the resurrection had occurred. Yet the biggest struggle for me is understanding why would God allow this to happen. In trying to rationalize in my mind, I can see where the early church needed to establish itself as an entity different from the old Jewish Pharisaical ways. It would make logical sense that they would then develop a Sunday day of worship. That was at the beginning of the church age, but as we look to the end of the church age, as we're getting closer and closer to Christ's return and the millennial kingdom starting, it would make sense to me that we would have a renewed interest in exactly when the resurrection occurred and whether we're honoring the Sabbath or not. Shouldn't we be putting more emphasis on the Sabbath as the end of the age approaches? Is the church of today really honoring the Sabbath? Is this affecting our understanding of eschatology, knowing that we have mistakenly taken the Jewishness out of our Christianity? So, going through the sequence of days in a Jewish calendar by itself disproves our modern-day Gentile church belief that Jesus died on a Friday and rose on a Sunday. The time spent in the tomb in this case would only be 2 days, from Nisan 14 to Nisan 16, the second day instead of Nisan 17. We must remember it was the third day on which Jesus resurrected, as we look at his own statement in Matthew 12:40. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And this is also cross-referenced in Jonah, the first chapter, 17th verse. If crucifixion day was indeed on Friday, where was even a part of a third night in the grave if he indeed arose on Sunday morning? A Nisan 14 Friday crucifixion would necessitate Jesus' resurrection on Monday, Nisan 17 of that week. So the truth of the matter is Jesus died on Wednesday at 3 p.m. on Nisan 14. Within 3 hours he was buried, and then at sunset it became Nisan 15, which was the start of the Jewish Sabbath celebration. This lasted a day, and then the following day was another day of preparation, as it was Friday before the normal Saturday Sabbath. Then, on the third day, Nisan 17, Jesus arose. This spectacular event occurred sometime near the end of the Sabbath day, as the sun was setting on Nisan 17. The women were not allowed to go back to the tomb until the following Sunday morning. And if we remember in Scripture, as they arrived near sunrise, the resurrection had already occurred. Another major flaw with the Friday crucifixion theory is that the following day is when the Pharisees met with Pilate to talk about Jesus' body and how it needed to be guarded for 3 days. And this would never happen according to custom, as this would be on the Saturday Sabbath day, and there was no activity to be done of this sort. And the Pharisees paid very careful attention to Sabbath detail. Matthew 27th chapter verses 62 through 64 addresses this very next day after the crucifixion, and it states, quote, "The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. 'Sir,' they said, 'we remember that while we were still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first.'" So you see, they were meeting the day after Preparation Day. Preparation Day was the day that led up to the Sabbath activities. So if indeed Jesus died on a Friday, that Preparation Day would be from sunset Thursday to sunset Friday. And this would immediately be followed by the Sabbath celebration. So if the next day after Preparation Day they were meeting with Pilate, they were meeting on the Sabbath, and this was definitely against the Sabbath regulations. And when you look to the time immediately prior to the crucifixion in John 18th chapter 28th verse, you see that the Pharisees had a deep concern for the Passover. This statement says, quote, "Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, 'What charges are you bringing against this man?'" So you see, there would be indeed a contradiction in Scripture if there was a Friday crucifixion. But if there was a Wednesday crucifixion followed by a Thursday day of preparation leading up into Sabbath, then everything would harmonize with Scripture. And again, we have to remember the Jewish day started at sunset. So when we say a Jewish Friday, we're talking about it starting on a Thursday evening.